Today's recipes come out of some very old school religious traditions, cultural traditions. I'm going to be going over which traditions different recipes come out of and some of my own personal history that inspired these classes. Before I do that, this is not a class that claims that this is the right way, or that this is the only way, or that if you're not doing this, then you're not really a real witch. We don't play the no true Scotsman witch argument here. We don't play whose magic game is best. I have kitties present today. You all know what I normally say for that. You can put that in. No one can tell you which way to witch. There is no witch pope, and you can't be excommunicated because you witch in a way that I don't want you to witch. This is not the only valid path. It is just one of very, very many paths. We are going to be spending some time going into why this path has gone underground significantly, why it's been sterilized, why it's been homogenized, where the erasure is stemming from. That doesn't mean that you have to incorporate it or that you can't sort of go, ew, that's not for me. That's perfectly valid. I have no problem with you being vegan, vegetarian, never wearing leather, never playing around in the dark, never touching anything dead. That's up to you. I'm a blood and bones kind of a gal. Try to engage in the following practices if you choose to incorporate them in a respectful fashion. You get to figure out where your line is on what you consider respectful and what other people would consider respectful within the boundaries of what is legal in your area. State law varies significantly on what is legal to do in graveyards, what is legal to do with carrion culture. Carrion culture being the picking up of dead animals, bones, remnants of fur, even feathers. The Migratory Bird Act has made it illegal to gather feathers in some places and of some species, even if it's on the ground. If you are found in possession of it, you are in violation of state law in some states. Yeah. I don't have the laws memorized for every single state. Take the time to learn what's legal in your area, what's going to get you in trouble, and then figure out what you consider to be respectful practice and what you don't, and be prepared to defend that decision, because nothing is more of a hotbed topic in witchcraft than sort of the do we curse or don't we curse? Do we touch the energies of death or don't we touch the energy of death? Do we cast love spells? Do we not cast love spells? There's a lot of dialogue back and forth. There's also a lot of gate guarding, which is not what this class is about. And then we talk sometimes about how there's certain traditions that you can never do safely, that you can never do completely sane, that we aim for safer, safe-ish, saner, sane-ish. Another term for this is risk-aware practice. If you are dealing with the energies of decay, rot, death, if you're touching dead bodies of any kind, if you're touching bone, if you're making necromancer soil, which is one of the recipes that we're going over in this class, you are dealing with things that can make you or someone else sick. You are dealing with things that can spread disease. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. For one thing, it would make me a massive hypocrite, and I try really, really hard not to be an overt hypocrite and to catch myself if I'm sliding on that. I am going to say be risk aware, make conscious choices, try to do things as safely as you can, including things like grave laying. which is part of what we're going over today, or the ingesting of substances to make yourself closer to the veil or to get yourself across the veil and then back again. None of that's safe. A lot of the things, actually. So there keeps being a problem where I go and I try and create the exclusive content for Patreon. And one of the requests from our patrons was that I start talking about some of the things I did as a child when I was learning from my teachers. And I keep sitting down to do a little bit of research and explain the how and the why for in more detail than, hey, I remember doing this when I was a kid. So many of the things we did are such a bad idea. I keep going like, oh, that's maybe not a thing I want to do with my kid. That's maybe not a thing I want to teach other people is a good idea to do. Do your research, do your homework, understand the contraindications and what you're getting involved in, and then make a conscious choice. If you're going to do it, decide to do it, and have a backup plan for when things inevitably go wrong. In fact, have several. Moving right along, I want to talk about the narrative of acceptable magic. And I already went on a pretty epic rant about this recently, which is already up on our YouTube channel and our Facebook, in response to something I encountered at Pagan Pride, which was someone standing up on stage and saying, you know, witches should not ever witch in this particular way because then when we're oppressed and persecuted, it's our fault and we're to blame. I'm not a fan of victim blaming. Yeah, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I'm not going to go into the full rant again. I am going to say that there is a narrative around what is considered acceptable. And that narrative is primarily from white, affluent, academic sources dating back to when we were trying to bring sort of the practice of witchcraft into the public again. And the narrative wound up controlled by some very specific people who were, again, white, imperialist, British, American, affluent men. And what they wrote down as sort of this is the general practice was sterilized, homogenized, and in many cases, really racist. And erased a lot of cultural practices from Indigenous and First Nations people. What's considered acceptable now is what they've thought they'd be able to get away with in academic circles. It's what they thought they would be able to present and say, see, it's not that far out there. See, it's not that different. See, it's not that strange. It's not too far away from Christianity. It's not too far away from Judeo-Christian puritanical values. Don't keep oppressing us. And in order to gain legitimacy in the eyes of the people they feared oppression from, they kind of stepped on and denigrated and dismissed the practices of other people. Now, in particular, a lot of those practices were African or First Nations of the Germanic or Celtic people, the Native American people, the South American people. And one of the sad things about this is, to this day, people will say, oh, we never did. Oh, we never did. We never did practice that way. We never did use those things. That was just something the Catholic Church said about us so that we could they could persecute us. And you get these indigenous people, these First Nations people, these African diasporic traditions going, we're still here. We still practice this way. You get Eastern traditions saying this, Indo-European traditions saying this, Asian traditions saying, we still do this. And white pagans going, no, we don't, no, we don't, no, we don't. And in particular, even the white cultures did. Celtic and Germanic paganism included necromancy. Celtic and Germanic paganism included death practices. Celtic and Germanic paganism included some really fascinating death practices, including Samhain and the bathing of the clothing of the dead. Some of our most fascinating death practices in Appalachian conjure, in Appalachian cunning, come from the Celtic and Germanic base. So when people go like, oh no, white people were above those icky black magic things, not only are they being racist, they're just wrong. They're just wrong. Your historical research is bad and you should feel bad. This narrative of acceptable magic is never going to play out the way these people want it to. They are never going to be accepted by Judeo-Christian puritanical academia. They are never going to be accepted by it. It doesn't matter what degree of witch you are. If you label yourself a witch, there's an entire group of people who have a lot of power in the imaginary pyramid structures of the world who are going to go, ew, you're not allowed with us. And sterilizing our practices more to appeal to them is not going to work. And in fact, the most famous witch in the Bible, the witch of Endor, was specifically summoned before Saul to perform necromancy, to summon the spirit of Solomon. I just blanked who she summoned. She summoned a spirit for the king to talk to, and that's necromancy. So moving right along into the what is necromancy and what all am I going to be giving you recipes for today? Because we could have a whole class on how Christian and Catholic witchcraft has blended into paganism in the Appalachian Mountains and created some fascinating cultural drifts. But that is a class for a different day. So we've talked before about necromancy, but I'm going to do the 5-minute version for the beginning of this class. Let's start with what the word necromancy actually means. It comes from dead, necros, and manteria, which means divination. Originally, necromancy just meant using the spirits of the dead to tell you things. The belief was, and particularly in the Fertile Crescent and the Hellenic Empire, that the dead knew things that the living did not. That their limitation in what they could see, what they could hear, what they could understand about the universe itself, everything from this planet to the structure of the universe beyond it, was no longer bound by the limitation of human understanding. So if you could talk to the dead, they could tell you things about the world. They could tell you things about the universe. And sometimes that was very practical things like, how should we prepare for a slim harvest? Who's going to win the election? How do we need to prepare for this invading army? Are there spirits attacking my house? Should I trust the new priest? And sometimes it was very much a seeking of enlightenment as to the structure and order of the natural world. They believed that the dead could teach them the languages of animals. They believed that the dead could teach them how to control and bind other spirits. They believed that the dead could tell them what was beyond the earth that we understood, what realms lay thereafter, what happened before you were born and what would happen after you died. That is necromancy, by the word necromancy. But there were all manner of death magic practices that didn't fall under the heading of divination, and that were very, very prevalent. We'll start with the eating of the dead. Some of you are into Harry Potter, right? Are you a Harry Potter fan? You know the name for the bad guy groups? Death Eaters? The Voldemort belongs to the Death Eaters, right? That's actually a thing from really, really ancient witchcraft, coming all the way up to the spread of the Catholic Empire, where after someone had died, either people ate their ashes or they actually ate bits of their body in order to keep them with them forever, or in order to inherit some part of their ability or power. This is such a widespread cultural tradition that I could spend multiple classes discussing the varying ways that people ate the dead in old cultures. We find this in South America with the eating, with the Aztec and the Mayans, eating of the dead, in really elaborate rituals like drinking blood out of skulls kind of a thing. We find it in Africa with really elaborate rituals to pass familial power down bloodlines. So if one person was said to have true sight, then their child might eat their eyes, and then their child might eat their eyes, and then their child might eat their eyes, and literally pass it down to the eating of ashes. Other necromantic practices that didn't involve divination included using the dead as guardians. Now this one persists all the way up to cunning practices that I'm going to talk about and then warn you are super illegal, where they would literally seal the dead up into walls as guardians of a place. This death magic was everywhere. It was everywhere. There is no continent onto which death magic did not step. But I've noticed that the further we get into modern culture, the more distant we are from death in general. Let me ask you a question. Last time you ate a chicken, how did it come?
In a box, deep fried.
In a box, deep fried. Last time you ate a chicken, how did it come?
I don't remember last time I ate chicken.
Are you a vegetarian?
Nah, oh wait. I guess it was boxed and deep fried as well.
Okay, boxed and deep fried. All right, what about you? But it came to you dead. It came in like a sealed package, probably had some salt injected into it.
We kill our own, but yeah, they're not on a farm, so.
Yep. Most people in modern America, I'm not going to say all people. I mean, I'm literally sitting here with one of my friends who just came from a farm. I myself grew up in a partially agrarian tradition. I've definitely killed a chicken. They bleed a lot more than people think they do.
They really, really do.
We're very divorced from where our food comes from. We're very divorced from it to the point where one of the big arguments in favor of veganism is that it doesn't have any repercussions on people. Like it's not harmful to the environment, it's not harmful to living animals. It is. It actually is harmful to immigrant workers, to poor workers in countries that are now growing crops to substitute in for meat, like quinoa, like Bolivian farmers who cannot afford their own staple grain anymore. It dismisses the fact that in some regions it's better to have meat as your primary source of food, and in some regions it's better to have vegetables, and it all depends on the water and soil balance of your area. And one of the interesting things about this is they don't know that. They can't know that. I'm not judging them for not knowing that, and I'm not telling you not to be vegan. If that's what you want to do, you be vegan. But they don't have cultural context for how food is grown, how food is gathered, who pays for what's on your dinner table. They don't know. They have no idea. And we don't grow our own food anymore. People grow lawns. They do. It's a thing.
Occasionally herbs.
But in particular, so lawns used to be a thing that the rich had. The rich could have green pastures that they didn't have to grow any food on, and it was a way of saying, look at me, look how rich I am. I can pay someone to keep this trimmed and neat, and I don't have to grow food on it. I have all this land, and I can let it go to waste. Now not having a yard would be very strange, and people don't have the time, the energy, or the money to grow their own food. In fact, growing your own food is something rich housewives do. It's not something the poor does. And we've become so backwards. Even now, our whole standard of beauty has changed, because now it's the rich who can afford to be skinny and the poor who are overweight. Everything is shifted. Anyway, so moving right along, let's talk about one of the things we've lost with this division between us and where our food comes from, which is basic decay magic. The idea that things break down. To everything there is a season, to everything there is a period where it must die and it must return to the earth, and then it will create something new. We don't even let our bodies do that. We are so obsessed as a culture with being wealthy and beautiful that we want it to last beyond our death. We want beautiful caskets. and we want to leave behind beautiful corpses. There's even songs about this. And in order to do this and to be seen as having left a beautiful corpse, we inject all manner of noxious chemicals into our bodies, which then go into the earth and are literally poisoning it. There's a whole environmental crisis right now where the bodies we have buried, which are full of formaldehyde and other preserving chemicals, are damaging the soil. They're damaging the groundwater in certain regions. And I hate to break it to you, you know that $10,000 gorgeous casket? They break. As soon as the dirt goes on them, they break. What? Yeah, just... bah!
Yeah, you have so much weight coming down on it.
See, like, my husband and I have had whole talks. I would like to be burned. He wants to turn me into a diamond. Like, yeah, because he's like, then I get to keep you with me. And I'm like, so eat my ashes. And he's like,
Yeah, a diamond sounds better to me too.
I don't want to be a diamond. Diamonds are worthless. At least ashes have value.
Well, but if you're a diamond, you're worth everything to him.
Ashes feed new growth. Diamonds are useless.
Diamonds are overmined.
Diamonds
And
are
worthless.
overmined and worthless and are leading to human persecution.
Turns up into bones and art.
Right, like turn me into art. Make me into a wind chime. Come on now.
Really interesting.
I just imagine a wind chime with bones now. Boom, wind chime.
One of the things I've noticed with our lack of understanding in decay magic is that whole let's leave behind a beautiful corpse that then poisons the environment. But also, people don't like to feed their own gardens. I have been called in. I have a weird job in the community, and I get all manner of odd requests. I sometimes feel like I'm in an MMORPG, and I've got like just odd side quests all through my day. Like I have my one main quest, and then I get all my little weird side quests. And one of the things I've been called out to do is to check other witches' gardens to see if they've been cursed. Because they plant their witchy gardens, and they're dying. Now in particular, we live in Vegas, and the soil out here is terrible, and it's 115 degrees on a good day in the summer. So it is really hard to grow things out here. But also, they don't feed their gardens. They don't have their decaying plant matter that they set aside and churn to go feed things. They won't use blood meal on their roses. Yeah. Isn't that goofy?
Well, it sounds kind of gross.
It's just powdered blood and bone. That's all it is. Yeah. And it's really, really good for your roses. And in fact, most roses... I mean, there's a reason why roses are traditionally associated with the dead. And that's because they tend to grow where there are dead bodies. They like it. They like the blood. They like the bone. They are. And the funny thing is, they used to grow naturally into very welcoming thickets. Their thorns were smaller, their blossoms were smaller, and they tended to vine and twist and curl. Humans decided that they wanted roses with straight stems and very large blossoms, and in breeding them to do so, they wound up with more wicked thorns. So now they grow differently and they have different nutrient requirements, but old school, really old school roses still snarl and tangle and create their own natural thickets and tend to grow where the dead are.
I
So,
wondered how mom was ever able to grow home roses. That was like the only thing she could ever keep alive. But I think they were burying the animals by the roses.
well, that would work.
We had a bunch of fish and guinea pigs and hamsters.
One of the things I've shared about growing up was that my family and I, once a year, would go through this one area in the Appalachian Mountains and participate, when we could get there, in an early summer ritual where all of the, I don't want to say witches because they identified as good Christian women primarily. They were Pennsylvania Dutch. They were Braucherie, which are Christian syncretized into paganism, or paganism syncretized into Christianity. It's Germanic paganism that's blended. But we would cut our hands and bleed into buckets of water, and we would take that bloody water and we'd pour it down where the crops would be going. And then we would burn our fire line, which literally means burning a part of the field, so that when the fires came, which they would inevitably come, they would stop at that line of death and not be able to cross it. And this was just a summer ritual we did every year. Well, not every year. There were years we didn't make it out. But it's very odd to me. I've talked about this with people out here in Vegas and had them be like, what? You bled on the crops? And it's like, you know, friends, you need to put dead fish on crops. You need to put, like, bone meal on crops. I'm not sure. And I figured it out when I went to the Lowe's Garden Center for the first time. Because it's all broken down into names. It's magnesium, it's calcium, it's silica. They don't know where it comes from. We've sterilized our gardening. We've sterilized everything. The first time I bought chicken from a Walmart, I opened up the chicken and was like, what is this? It doesn't smell like anything. It kind of feels like one of those breast gel inserts.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't taste like anything either. I now understand why people are like, this tastes like just chicken. This tastes like chicken. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's because they have no idea what chicken tastes like.
Not good chicken.
Anyway, sorry. Before I go much further and start talking about actual practical ways in which to incorporate some of these practices, I want to take a second and say that this was actually a really difficult class for me to put together. This class was requested by one of my apprentices, hi Tina, about 2 years ago. And I sat down, yeah, you want to say hi to Tina? She's not actually there. Yeah, she just watches the videos. I sat down with my stack of notebooks, because every year when I was traveling with my great-grandmother, I would fill a new notebook, and I've got just stacks. At one point I started scanning the pages, and that's when it led to the chicken is the line joke with Matt, because he found my Romani recipe for exorcism. The chicken is the line. The chicken is the line where I have to stop talking to people who came from traditions out here about what I grew up with, because that's the chicken is the line where they're like, you pull the spirit into a chicken, and then you kill the chicken and kill the spirit inside the chicken, and then you cleanse the chicken thoroughly, and then you eat the chicken.
Why would you waste good food? Of course
Why would you waste the chicken? That would be disrespectful to its sacrifice. But I had this all drawn out, and I tend to write my spells with illustrations, so there was like an illustration of a dead chicken, and he was like, you cannot publish this. On that note, where I was going with this, I grew up, I make a joke that most people don't think is funny, but I think is funny, that I grew up with my feet in 3 worlds. And that, yeah, that is as hard as it sounds. Because I don't have 3 feet, exactly. It's hard enough to feel like you're in 2 separate worlds, but 3 is ridiculous. In that I was growing up with my great-grandmother, who was Romani and then married to a Scottish traveler. I traveled with her and learned from people from the Ozarks, from the Appalachian Mountains, from the Limberlost, from the areas of Washington and Oregon where people retreat to and form communes. And those are already very blended, very syncretized, very unique cultures on their own, very different from the Romani, which I end up just kind of calling cunning practices or clever work or medicine work, because a lot of what names get applied to those traditions aren't what they call themselves. Most of them call themselves Christian, but it's not Judeo-Christian, puritanical American culture, which is the 3rd world I had a foot in, just growing up in America. And the cultural differences there when I went to write this class basically boil down to this. I am not permitted to teach most of what I learned from my Romani grandmother about working with death, because it is part of our spirituality that we don't teach people, and it's a closed cultural practice. But I will say that it was very difficult for me growing up to follow both sets of rules. I'll give you an example. Where was I? Oh, right, the toad. The Romani that I grew up with, again, I am not a representative of all Romani everywhere. That would be like a Salagi person saying that they represented all First Nations people from all over the world. Or a Navajo person saying they represented all the other Native American tribes of America. They don't. They represent only the tribe that they grew up in. Just like I can only represent my Campania, my Familia. I can't even represent my entire Natsia because the Romani, the Calderash Romani in the Appalachian Mountains are very different from the Calderash Romani in Romania right now. They're very different now. I represent just the ones I grew up with. The ones I grew up with don't handle toads. It's like it's a Marime thing. They're considered filthy. You're not supposed to touch them. But the cunning workers I grew up with, one of the death traditions I had to do as part of my learning their magic was to go nail a dead toad to a tree in a graveyard. So which do I follow? Which set of rules? Do I follow the Judeo-Christian American ones that are like, ew, toad, graveyard, weird, witchcraft, no? Do I follow the Romani ones that are like, no, you're not supposed to touch dead flesh? No, you're not supposed to touch a toad? Am I like super unclean because it was both? Or is it better that it was a dead toad rather than a live toad? These are not questions I ever got an answer to.
Probably grosser to touch a dead toad.
Probably. I mean, because it's like double Maribe. It's like very, very bad.
Could have disease.
Maybe they cancel each other out.
I don't know. And Grandma wasn't really helpful about this kind of stuff because I'd be like, Grandma, I feel like I'm going to break somebody's rules. And she's like, as long as you're not breaking your own.
Cool grandmas.
Cool, Grandma. Thank you.
That was very helpful.
That was helpful. I'm no longer conflicted about this. I no longer feel like I'm going to get my ass kicked out, which is a thing that can happen. Anyway, putting this class together was hard. Partially because a lot of the stuff that I have in my notebooks is super illegal. Anything to do with a hand of glory. Anything to do with using the femur of a dead man as the wand you ward your house with. Like, I wrote it all down because it's a culture that is dying. They're... Yeah, come do a challenge. Yep.
What is your favorite color and why?
What is your favorite color and why?
And leave a like on it.
Okay, and remember to like and subscribe. My favorite color is either gray or orange.
Because you have like 2 orange chairs.
I have 2 orange chairs at home because they're my favorite color. You've got the order backwards.
They both mean the same thing.
I like gray because of how often gray was a color in my childhood, whether it was the mists that were rolling in on the mountains in the storm nurseries, whether it was the color of the decaying crab apples, they turn brown gray, whether it was the clouds that pass over the moon, gray was a big color for me, and I like orange because it makes me happy.
My favorite color is red.
Your favorite color is red because you like it. That's all it needs. Yeah. Anyway, you will seriously get arrested if you do these. Or I'm not there. In many cases, there's something I wouldn't do. I would buy an old Hand of Glory. In fact, I'm in the process of talking to an oddity shop about purchasing one. I would not go make one now, because, I mean, I guess if I found one in like an old abandoned ghost town, there's a question of what I would and wouldn't do. I haven't yet. I haven't had that moment to decide. But I certainly wouldn't go into a modern graveyard and dig somebody up and make it out of that. Alrighty. So, just to be super clear, the traditions I'm going over today do not come from the Romani culture. They do not. I cannot teach those. Even then, even if I could teach you what I learned, it would only be representative of my family, from my Campania, from my Natsia. It would not be representative of the Romani as a whole. The things I'm going over today come from what get called Appalachian conjure. Nobody who practices calls it that. They don't. They call themselves grandmothers and grandfathers and say that they're working medicine, or they say that they're helping their community, or they say they have a way. They have a way of dealing with something. They have a way about them. None of them call it that. That's something academics applied to it later. So, there's a couple different ways that I broke this down. I broke this down into being able to communicate with and hear the spirits, to use them either for divination or just because you want to communicate with them. Not because you necessarily want to know their secrets, maybe you just want to have a chat. Okay? I broke it down into how to create ancestral spaces. This is something I feel like we've lost. A lot of people don't know why they have ashes on their mantelpiece. They know that that's a thing that's done, that you take the ashes and you put it on the mantelpiece, but they don't know why. And in particular, we go to very sterile graveyards to have communication, even in movies. I want you to think about a movie or a TV show where somebody died, and then the person wanted to have a conversation with them. Where do they go?
Tombstone.
To the tombstone. They don't have a conversation with them in the privacy and safety and security of their home. They have to leave it and go find where that person is buried. You can't move homes, you can't move states, you can't move countries because you leave your dead behind you if you do. No one carries their dead with them, which I think has a lot to do with our fear of mortality right now. The idea that you get left behind, you get forgotten, you get put in the dark, and no one remembers you. And it's a very Western idea of death. Alrighty. I broke it down into that. I broke it down into things you do involving the dead. So, warding your house, creating safe spaces for other spirits that you work with, using their power to supplement your own, which I'm going to talk about the ethics of. Everything I wrote down involves dangerous ingredients, dangerous locations, and handling things that are dirty, gory, or covered in germs. This may not be the class for you. You're welcome to it as an academic curiosity. So let's start with honing and hearing. One of the things that I keep being asked is, well, how do you practice working with the dead if you cannot see or hear them? A, you don't have to. You do not have to be able to see or hear the dead in order to be able to practice death magic. There are very, very many people who go out in South America and create ancestor altars once a year that cannot see or hear the dead. There are very many people who celebrate giant festivals to the dead all over Spain and Italy and Eastern Europe who cannot see or hear the dead. One of the main reasons I feel like working with the dead is so important is so that you're not afraid of it. So that it's no longer this slamming door that leaves you alone, that leaves you alone in the living and them alone in death. The idea being to bridge that, to conquer our fear, to understand that that's a next stage. Whether you're in the skeptic's corner and you believe that the next stage is that you become energy, that you return to the earth, that your soul goes on to nothingness. Whether you're in the spiritualist corner and you believe there's a new journey after death. Doesn't matter to me. The idea is to become at one with it, to become at peace with it, to no longer feel abandoned in the living or abandoned in death. And you don't need to be able to see or hear them to do that. Now, if you want to, traditionally, you practice listening, and you practice grave laying, and you practice seeking to see. So I broke it down into 3 things that I found over and over and over again in my notebooks. To practice listening, you go where the dead are. You go to the bedroom of the person you lost. You go to their favorite chair. You go to where your dog used to like to curl up in the sun. You go to their favorite park. You go to where they are buried, where they remain. You go to where there are many, many dead spirits. You go and you listen. And primarily, where I disagree with my teachers. My teachers said basically, just turn your ears on, just turn your ears on, just turn your ears on. Here, if that's not working for you, have this entheogenic substance and then turn on your ears. I got fed a lot of things as a child that I would not feed my 9-year-old. I've done some thinking on this, and there are definitely some concoctions that they were like, here, try this, that I'm not going to be doing that with my 9-year-old. Today's class isn't on the entheogens. That's an entirely separate class. If you want to learn about them, you can check it out on our YouTube channel under the playlist Enthyagens and Hallucinogens, and we talk about different blends for different things. But in particular, they would say, just do it. They were very much the Nike system of magic. Just do it, just do it, just do it. You'll get it eventually. Just keep trying. In particular, though, they never dealt with the primary block that my students deal with here. Since I've moved out, I have been told the same story over and over and over again. I used to be able to hear things. I used to be able to see things. And then something happened and I couldn't do it anymore. And inevitably, what we end up working out happened is their parents told them it wasn't real. Their parents told them to ignore it. Their parents told them that it was inconvenient. Their parents told them they were imagining things. They were just doing it for attention. I have several comments about this, starting with, if your child is making up something to get your attention, give them your attention. Why do we treat children wanting attention as a negative thing? Of course they want attention. They're children. I'm an adult, and I would still like attention, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in particular, you're supposed to pay attention to your children. If they're doing something to get your attention, pay it to them. I don't know where the breakdown here is, other than that Americans treat children as possessions rather than people. But in particular, no one in my grandma's groups of friends ever told me that something I was seeing or experiencing wasn't real. Even if they told me that they thought it was in my head, they told me that it was something in my head for a reason, that my head was trying to tell me something and that was how. So the idea that someone would have a block because they had pulled a blanket over their head and gone, it's not real, it's not real, it's not real, it'll go away if I ignore it, they didn't have any concept of that. So their method of just go sit and listen is much more likely to work because people hadn't spent their entire childhood trying to turn their ears and eyes off. If you have spent your entire childhood trying to turn your ears and eyes off, this is going to be harder. It is going to take dedicated repetition, and it is going to take you sort of sitting there and going, okay, self, I feel ridiculous, but if you are trying to tell me that you hear something, I'm listening. I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't listening, but I'm listening now. So, start by going where the dead are and listening. I wish that we still had catacombs, like that was a thing, because I feel like that would be the most effective way of doing this. As it is, I grew up in an area where no one puts gates, like locked gates, on graveyards. Like, the idea that there were like security cameras on the graveyards out here, I am not used to that. And no, I didn't find that out because I was doing anything illegal. I was just kind of like, why are there locked gates and security guards and cameras on everything? What is going on? Anyway.
People go and vandalize.
Who vandalizes graves?
There's a lot of disrespect. A lot of disrespect.
You want to get cursed? That's how you get cursed. Like, people are like, how do you curse people? People curse themselves, friends. You don't need to do a damn thing.
Just tell them to go to a graveyard and not be respectful.
And there's all these really intricate things online I'm seeing about like how to be respectful. It really breaks down to don't be a jerk. Treat them like you would your respected grandparents.
Ask for permission if you're taking a dirt.
Right, ask for permission. Tell them thank you. Remember to feed them. We'll get into this more when we get into ancestor worship. Grave laying. So there's different grave laying, and it breaks down a couple ways. There's grave laying, there's death watching, there's sleeping amongst the dead, and there's sleeping upon the dead, and they're all different. And they all vary from tradition to tradition. Some traditions use the one, and the others are all forbidden. And then some traditions use the other ones, and the other ones are forbidden. And then there are the occasional tradition that's like, all of it's good. All of it's good, have fun. One of my grandmother's very good friends was a shadow worker. And he was... And I mean, so that's what he called himself. He called himself a shadow person. He called himself a man in black. I'm not using the racist connotation of like black magic or dark magic. That was his title. That's what he called himself. And he did all of it. And I will go into what each one is. I have done grave laying. I have done grave sitting and sleeping with the dead. And I have done crossing the veil. I have not done laying upon the dead and do not intend to. I don't feel for myself that it is necessary. I'm good. I feel like the dead make themselves plenty known to me, and I don't need more help. If I ever do, maybe I'll reconsider it. So let's talk about what each of those are. Traditional grave laying is to literally go out and find a grave and lay there. And you combine this with either that listening technique or with one of the speaking to the dead techniques, which we're going to get into, or you combine it with some kind of an enthyagen, or you combine it with dying, and we'll get into that in a minute. I have done just on its own, go lay down on a grave. I have done it with enthyagens, and I have done it with something to kill me and bring me back. Honestly, the last one was not so much necessary, I think, for myself as it was necessary for my teacher. That particular teacher had like a list, and I had to do all the things and cross them off and be like, okay, I've done all the things, before she would teach me other things. So she said it was necessary, and okay. Grave laying involves literally going out and spending a night laying on a grave. Now, you may combine that with grave sleeping or not. In my tradition, you either did this on the grave of someone from your own family or on a grave that would be open to such things. It would be disrespectful for the witch to go lay on the priest's grave. You would not do this. But it would be perfectly within the bounds of this tradition if everyone knew that so-and-so's great-great-grandparent was a witch, for you to go lay on the witch's grave. Does that make sense? There was its own sort of moral code as to what was acceptable. You may have a different one. What I've been doing with my students out here is made very easy by the fact that we live surrounded by ghost towns. Just completely abandoned ghost towns. When we do our grave laying, we go out to graves that people have forgotten, where the death is no longer respected. They were just left behind. And we pay our respects. We clean the grave, we say our hellos, we eat a meal with them, we give them an offering, and we ask politely if we can do our grave laying there. And to some of you watching the video at home, or some of you in the class right now, you may say that's not good enough, you didn't know those people, they're not related to you. That's up to you. Anyway, grave sleeping would be to do this and fall asleep. Some traditions require that you stay awake all night. Some traditions specifically tell you to go fall asleep. I've done both. They accomplished very different things. In particular, the tradition that said that I should go fall asleep there also had a belief that the very first thing that should be buried in a graveyard was a dog. There's a belief in certain Germanic traditions that the first thing you bury in a graveyard stays in the graveyard forever. It doesn't get to move on, and it becomes the warden of the graveyard, the protector of the graveyard. And in order to avoid this trapping a human soul, you trapped a dog. So in that particular tradition, whether or not that's true on a subjective level, it was certainly true to myself as a 14-year-old person being guided in these traditions. So on the tradition where I fell asleep, I had a long conversation with the guardian of a graveyard. On the one where I stayed awake, I listened all night and was told things. So I'd say that they were of different value. Not one is better than the other. In the traditions where you do a death watch, or a death sitting, or a death sleeping, What this is that someone is dying, and you stay with them while they die. You sit with them, you hold their hand. This is not only something I was required to do in the culture I grew up in, it was something I continued doing as service hospice sitting. We go sit with the dying. It's an entirely different kind of laying down with death. And it's not for everyone. I do think that if you are going to be clergy, if you're going to be any kind of clergy who speaks for the dead, does memorial services, goes and speaks over a grave, then you should have done that. If you have not witnessed the passing over of a person, then you cannot speak to a family's grief. You don't understand it. But that's just me, and maybe you disagree, and that's fine. Using an enthyagen is using a hallucinogenic or other psychoactive substance in order to enhance your communication with the dead. Combining a hallucinogen, combining a psychoactive with going alone to a graveyard and laying down all night is an unsafe decision. That is just an unsafe tradition. Have someone go with you, have someone sit with you, have someone make sure that you are okay. Have them go do their grave listening while you do that. The crossing over, there are different methods. If you watch my class on Datura in our enthyagens and hallucinogens, I talk about the method used by the Bokor in order to have someone become as if dead and come back. You can also use dehydrated rhododendron, which is one of the substances that was used for me, was Datura, dehydrated rhododendron, anything containing tetrodotoxin, anything. Most recently, one of my teacher's students just did this with someone using a chemical like an anti-seizure medication, which suppresses the synaptic activity, and so put someone into a restful state where their brain was inactive and then brought them back from that. So we've just now adapted, apparently, and we're using... one of the things that's really flabbergasting to me is the way that a lot of witches are like never ever use pharmaceuticals, whereas many of the witches I knew were ecstatic when atropine became commonly available and you could just buy it pre-done in a bottle. So anyway, if you're going to do the method where you literally go across the veil, walk through the door of death, have a guide. Have someone who's taught you how to make that journey and return to yourself, mostly still you. Have a tradition whose background you're using for that, whose backbone you're using for that, so you're not adrift in that on your own. You don't have to stay in that tradition forever. I firmly believe that you should keep learning and figure out what works for you. Build your own traditions. But don't do that alone.
You said come back mostly as you.
No
What happens to
one...
the rest of...
You come back as a different you. Dying changes you. That's one of the reasons why you do this, is to come back as a you that has died. Now, there are people... I have met people who did this on accident, who died and came back on accident. Still valid. If anything, maybe more valid. Alrighty, moving right along. The thing I said that I did not do was laying on the dead. There is a very famous necromancer who's written some really controversial online articles about necromancy, and she in particular bribes people in morgues to let her go lay down on dead bodies.
So you don't mean laying on a grave, laying with the actual...
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're gonna, go to a mausoleum. Go to a mausoleum, go to a place where you can... There are more respectful ways of doing that.
Does it have to be like fresh dead, or can it be a skeleton? Or...
I think a skeleton would be fine, right? She's written some really... I'm not linking to her. I don't agree with her practices. Y'all get to make up your own minds. In fact, please make up your own minds. But I'm not comfortable with that line that she crossed. I would not cross it myself. Alrighty. Moving right along, talking to them. Talking to them and seeing them. I wrote down 3 or 4 different methods that I have in my notebooks from things my teachers taught me. My favorite method is really unsafe. So my grandmother taught me to go out and find moss, something living, moss, lichen, that was growing on a grave. Like some living plant matter growing from the dead. And that you mushed that up with a little bit of blood and a little bit of mud, and you smeared it across your eyes, and you left it there, blinding you. Yes? What? Yeah, it's got about 45 minutes left. Blinding you until it started to unnerve you that you were blind. Until you started to sit there going like, I know that something's standing behind me. I know that something's standing in front of me. I know that something is about to touch my shoulder. You know how when you're in the dark and you can't see, you start to be uncomfortable? And then you removed it and you could see them. This is actually really bad for your eyes.
So you're talking not just on your eyelids? Like
No,
your eyes?
I put it on my eyelids, but gathering an unknown lichen from a gravestone and smearing it on your eyes is not probably
The safest thing.
they're probably the safest thing to do. I would be a total hypocrite if I told you not to do it, because it's something I've done as recently as like 5 or 6 years ago, because I felt like there was something that was trying to make itself known to me that I just wasn't getting. It's not necessarily safe. Stagnant water. So this one actually dates back really, really far. I have it written down as coming from Cagliostro. So it's old, and I'm not sure which of my teachers told it to me, but that's who they credit it to. Specifically, you find a still or stagnant body of water into which you add a pure oil. Pure oil. So in the culture of the person who I think probably taught this to me, that would be animal fat that was reduced down into a liquid. You don't have to use animal fat. You could use olive oil. You could use household kitchen oil of choice, and the blood of your left palm. Begin by mixing the oil and blood until they are well blended. Approach the pool of water and drop a single drop of the blood and oil mixture into the water. Next, starting just below your chin, draw a line leading down to your heart. At this point, gazing into the water should reveal the spirits that are around you. It's a religion, it's a tradition. I don't use my palm for anything but warding anymore. I used to use my palms because so many rituals called for it. It hurts, and the cuts keep reopening, and it makes it so that it's harder for me to do the work I do for the community. It's very hard to haul boxes of food into somebody's house if your palm keeps bleeding. Now I use the back of my hand. The only thing I still use my palm for is when I do my thing where I cut my hand and I put the blood in the warding oil and I put a handprint on my house. And I do that because it's like, no, this is mine. Similar like licking a muffin. It's yours now. This is a Hellenic one. Fill a large bronze or copper vessel with 2 parts spring water to 1 part blood. Light a single candle and extinguish all other light. Sit so that the flame illuminates your face in the bowl, but only to the point it is recognizable as a face. Ensure that your attributes that make you recognizable to yourself as yourself are not visible. Gaze deep and invoke the spirit you wish to speak to. Alternatively, you can reflect with this basin at any pit and flame ritual to assist in seeing the called upon spirits. To end this ritual, take the blood water and wash your face with it, thus returning your face to your face. One thing about this one in particular, when I did it, it feels like they use you to talk to you. Like you gave them your face, and you have to put it back on so that they can't do that anymore. So it's not for everybody. All right. New moon water from a graveyard. Go to a graveyard. Fill up a bucket. Do this on the new moon when there is no reflection. Get the water as black and mirror-like and still as possible. Now you have a reflective surface that works better than any other black mirror I've ever used. You can use it then, or you can pour it into a bottle and use it when you need it later in a reflective dish of your choice. I have a silver bowl I use. Alrighty. Does anyone have questions on that before we move into ancestor worship? I saw a thing recently that said that white people weren't allowed to do ancestor worship because it was cultural misappropriation. Okay. A white person should not be going and stealing Lukumi or Kendolga Yeye or Lakota ancestor worship practices. You're right. They should not be going and dabbling in some other culture, taking sans cultural context, how they worship their dead, and going home and going, I'm doing this thing. You're right. That is not a thing they should do. But there is literally, I have not been able to find a single tradition in the world that doesn't have a version of ancestor veneration. And I've looked. Like, I haven't found it. So the counterexample one of my students gave me was, well, what about the traditions that do not allow you to speak the names of the dead? That's a form of veneration. Not disturbing them in their afterlife is a form of veneration. And again, someone's going to go, well, what about Christianity? Christianity absolutely venerates their dead. What do you think those weird sterile graveyards with the angel statues are? That is a form of veneration. It's kind of a weird, sterile, divorced veneration, but it's there. And the Gnostics bathed their dead in fragrant oils, washed their bodies with them, draped them in very particular veils, sat with them for 3 days with all the mirrors covered and all the doors open in the house. Original Christianity had intense veneration of the dead. So, no, I haven't found a culture that doesn't, including Germanic, Celtic, and European. The Germanic and Celtic and European cultures, before the spread of Roman Catholicism, had veneration of the dead. Different forms of it in different cultures, whether that was taking the bodies of the dead down to the river and washing them, whether it was carrying your sibling back from war on your back so they could be buried in their hometown. There were all manner of ways, including the wearing of the hair of the dead, or the carrying of their tears. Let's say Victorians, do you know what a lacrimosa is? It's a bottle that you put a bit of your dead into, and you carry it with you, and for a year, every time you cry for the person who has died, you put a little bit of your tears in the lacrimosa bottle. And then at the end of a year, when you are ready to sort of move on and try and experience life without sort of the ashes of the dead hanging on you, you went and poured it out. Okay? But like Judeo-Christian culture seems to have lost stuff that's still in the Bible. The shredding of the clothes, the smearing with ashes, the wearing of sackcloth as a form of veneration of the dead. It's very odd. They used to recite whole lineage. The Christians, and before them the Jews, whose culture they sort of branched out of, they used to recite the lineage of their dead at funerals while they rended themselves over their most recent loss. So, no, it is not limited to one culture. It is not limited to one skin color. It is open to all people. So, a Book of the Dead is an easy way for someone who is not particularly open about doing death practices to connect with and honor their dead. You literally go around and ask your family about your lineage, about your ancestry, and you create a book. of all the people that anyone remembers and the details about their lives that they remember. So you can gather photographs, you can gather, mementos that people have, and then make 2 lists out of this. One is the list of the dead to which you feel personally connected, that you feel you knew when they were alive, or that you feel you have the traits of, or that you feel are important to you. And one is a list of the dead that's sort of, it's the second cousin twice removed, you're not particularly attached to it. Of those that are your dead, so now you have sorted out your dead, you make a list of the names and the knowledge and the mementos that you have of them. And then you have that book, and when you summon or conjure by the dead, you have your spirits that you can call upon, that can protect you, or that can just be your witnesses. What happened on the East Coast a lot is before a ritual, we would call the witnessing dead. We would call the witnessing and venerable dead and say, you are our witnesses to what transpires here. By your witness, it is so. It actually happened. Maybe this is a weird conjure thing. You need a witness to make it so. Never mind. All right. Speaking the dead, in order for you to have a good relationship with your dead, you can't do what I've found is done in America, where no one speaks ill of them. Because then it's not really them. One of the things I've seen in America is people go, well, you can't talk ill of the dead. You can't say that they were a bad person, or that they did bad things, or that they left behind unhealed wounds that aren't being addressed. This is not a great way to get closure. It's not psychologically healthy to refuse to acknowledge that things happened. In particular, what I was taught you did was you spoke the truth of the dead, which is that people are complicated and no person is all good or all bad. Everyone is a blend of those 2 poles. They're a spectrum, dancing back and forth. Some people are really good about some things and really awful about other things. And no person is entirely a monster. When you speak the truth of the dead, whether that's at their memorial service, at their funeral, or when you venerate them in your home, then you welcome that spirit and not a superficial mask of that spirit, not a pretend spackle person. You can create a spirit altar. I was taught spirit altars were very, very simple. Think of it as your grandparents. When your grandparents visit, if they are staying for the weekend, what's the first thing you offer them? Somewhere to stay, a bedroom. What's the second thing you offer them?
Food, blankets.
Food, drink, comfort. That's it. That's all you need. You need a place for them to stay, which is made easier. You want it? Which is made easier if you have bits of them, but not impossible if you don't. Okay? You carry bits of your dead with you. You are them. You have their DNA legacy, their mimetic legacy. You have the memories of them. If you can't have a bit of their hair, or a bit of their bone, or a bit of their ash, or even a picture of them, write out what you remember of them. Write out a thorough little story of the person that you are inviting and leave that. And you make a comfy space for them. Whether that's a spirit vessel, a poppet, a dish, that varies significantly from culture to culture. I've had people tell me from, I know, it ends at 7. I've had people tell me that cunning and conjure practitioners do it this way or that way and argue back and forth. And there are so many ways up and down those mountains. There's so many little mini pockets of cultures that I could spend an entire class just talking about different ways they make their ancestor altars. It's very much how Santeria in Cuba is very different from Santeria in Mexico. It's very, very, very different. And so you could get one Santero saying, we make ancestor altars this way, and another Santero going, we make ancestor altars this way, and neither is wrong. It's just different. However you make it, don't forget to feed them. And you can make the choice whether you're going to feed them their favorite foods or whether you're going to feed them what everyone else is eating. But don't forget to feed them. I say, as someone who has an altar in my house and I haven't made an offering. I've made an offering to my great-grandmother. There's a spirit I work with that was nagging me like 2 days ago. No, it's not Scarecrow. No.
Is that the other guardian one?
Yeah, it's my little teak shrine. Yeah. He's mad. I moved out of Fuss's house because Fuss always gave him offerings like once every couple weeks, and then I've been bad about it. Black bread. Unleavened black bread is a traditional treat in these regions, oftentimes served over with coffee and chocolate. Literally, you take the black bread and you pour coffee and chocolate and milk over it, and you eat it break it up and eat it that way. In particular, it is half a cup of wheat flour, 3 cups of dark rye flour, 1 egg yolk, 1/2 a cup of oil, 1/3 to 1/2 a cup of good raw honey, 1 cup of whole milk. Mix the 2 flours together, heat a saucepan on low, mix in the oil and honey, turn the heat off, and just let it stay warm in the pan. On a separate saucepan, lightly heat up the milk, separate the egg from the yolk. In a small bowl, mix the egg yolk with the warm milk. If the milk is too hot, you will wind up with scrambled eggs. Mix the milk and egg mix into the flour. Add the warm oil and honey mixture to the flour. Mix. If it's too watery, add more rye flour. If it's too thick, add more milk. Separate dough into small bowls and score with your hex mark. Score with your mark of scratch. In particular, this one I got from the Brauerie, so she called it a hex mark. Heat the oven to 350 degrees, lay your dough on cookie sheets, bake the bread for 10 minutes. If not baked properly, add in another 2 minutes. Sorry, this is how we wrote down our recipes. I know that there are steps that are supposed to be in like modern cookbooks that are not in that recipe. I'm surprised I have amounts instead of add honey and milk. Because my teachers were very much like, oh, you'll know when you've added enough. And it's like, no, Grandma, no, I don't know. Or they were very much the add a splash, add a pinch, add a dash. All right.
I was going to ask, like, if you had, like, by weights.
No. No. The only thing we got into weights on were things like processing atropine. So Grandma treated certain seizure conditions with atropine made from Atropa belladonna. And in that particular case, she made it in grains. And she measured it out by either weight or by a knife's blade. Like this many grains on a knife's blade is how many you need. Other than that, she was very much a like, so a lot of the recipes in these notebooks that I had, which you've been in my house, on the top of my bookshelves, there's like that stack, that's my witchcraft notebooks.